the idea of the relationship between abortion and vaccines is that 50 years ago, 60 years ago, there was one abortion that took place somewhere, and they've basically cultivated this sort of foundational something or other from it, and they've been using it ever since. But that's not the case, is it?
No, that's not the case at all. So there's a number of things wrong with that narrative. One is that it was one abortion. It was not one abortion. Just for the rubella component of the MMR vaccine, which is one of the abortion-tainted vaccines, there were 99 separate abortions. So,
oh, man.
Yeah, and that was to obtain the virus and then to obtain the cell line that the virus is then cultured in. So, we really, as Catholics, should say, one murder is sufficient. One grave sin is sufficient to send you to hell. So one abortion is sufficient to make the vaccine unethical, but it wasn't just one abortion. It was close to 100, and that's just for one vaccine. So there are multiple aborted fetal cell lines that are in use in vaccines and other therapeutic agents as well. Right now, I guess I shouldn't say other therapeutic because vaccines aren't used therapeutically generally, but so other medical interventions that are in use now. And the most recent one was developed in 2015. So this is not a problem that was confined to the 1960s and 1970s. And we made these cell lines and they're just immortal. They'll last forever. We can just keep using them. These cell lines actually senesce. And one of the reasons that aborted fetal cells are used instead of adult cells is because they've got a longer lifespan than adult cells would have. So you develop a cell line and it's going to replicate more times if you develop it from a very young individual versus developing it from you or me. So that's one of the sort of intellectual justifications it's used. Obviously, it's still not moral,
right?
And there are moral ways to get very young cells. You can get them from umbilical cords, things like that. So it's not necessary to do this even for that reason, but that's one of the justifications that's offered for it. But even with that in place, the cell line will eventually senesce. It'll eventually get older, will eventually die. Well, in vaccine research, there's not like some standard recipe for developing a vaccine. And this is why we don't have vaccines to everything. And, thanks be to God, we don't have vaccines to everything because we would be a total mess. But there's no standard recipe. So a lot of what ends up getting done is people will just kind of throw things at the wall and see what sticks. Well, if, somebody else has developed a good vaccine in a specific cell line, that cell line is more likely to get used again for later vaccines, right? So somebody developed, a vaccine in PERC6, and so that got used again for vaccines, or MRC5, or some of these other cell lines. So then as these cell lines get old, people who are still doing vaccine research are saying, oh, we need a cell line that's like that cell line. So we need an electively aborted baby of the same sex and roughly the same age. So in some cases, when they're collecting, aborted fetal tissue, they'll actually encourage the woman to stay pregnant a little longer so that the tissue can be, ready for what they're wanting to do with it. It's sick. It's just sick. And all of this stuff has, been published on Children of God for Life for a really long time, and nobody's been doing their homework because, there's been documents that have come out and said, well, you can still receive the vaccine as long as you protest, but where's the protest? Where's the
Lord have mercy, because it just makes me think of the Old Testament. You commit a grave sin and your whole civilization falls apart.
Right.
How is this any different?
Right. Well, you're building a medical intervention on the back of grave sin, and the other thing people don't realize is that these were, it wasn't like, this was some sort of, well, the woman was having the abortion anyway, and so we'll make some good come out of it. Like, these researchers were actively encouraging women to abort their children. And they were complicit in pressuring that, especially to get the virus for the rubella. So it's like, oh, you've been exposed to rubella, ma'am. Well, your baby's likely to develop congenital rubella syndrome. You should do an abortion, and we'd like to, dissect the fetus to see if we can have get this virus out of it. And they didn't need to do that either, because you know how they got the virus for. So there's an ethical rubella vaccine that's manufactured in Japan. They got the virus for that.
Is it sweet potato?
No, they swabbed some kid's nose who was sick. That's all they had to do.